Have you ever looked at someone who seems to cruise through life, manipulating others without a hint of remorse, and wondered, what's wrong with them? Or maybe you've had a boss who could charm the board of directors while ruthlessly destroying their employees' careers. Well, you might have encountered what psychologists call a psychopath or a sociopath. Today on Cyberspace, we're diving deep into the fascinating and sometimes frightening world of these complex personality types, including what happens when they rise to positions of power. Welcome back. I'm your host, Leslie Poston. Today, we're going to move through the human mind and its myriad manifestations and tackle a topic that's as intriguing as it is critical: the psychology of psychopaths and sociopaths. Understanding these complex personalities is essential, not just for personal safety, but for the broader implications they have on society, especially in leadership and technology. When we talk about psychopaths and sociopaths, we're actually describing two distinct patterns of behavior, even though they're often confused in popular media. Think of it this way: while both groups might act in ways that harm others, they tend to get there by different routes. A psychopath is someone who fundamentally lacks the capacity for empathy from the ground up. They can be incredibly charming and seem totally normal, even exemplary on the surface. They're often skilled at reading people's emotions and manipulating them, even though they don't actually feel emotional connections themselves. It's like they've studied human behavior from the outside and learned to mimic it perfectly while feeling none of the underlying emotions that typically guide our moral compass. Sociopaths, on the other hand, usually develop their traits as a response to their environment, often due to trauma, abuse, or extreme neglect. They can actually form emotional attachments to specific people or groups, but they tend to have a more erratic, volatile way of dealing with the world. Where a psychopath might calculatedly harm others for personal gain, a sociopath is more likely to lash out impulsively. What makes both types particularly fascinating and concerning is how well they can blend into society. We're not talking about the obvious villains you see in movies. These are often people who might live next door, work in the next cubicle, or even run major organizations or governments. And that's exactly why understanding them is so important. Picture this: a colleague who always seems to say exactly the right thing to higher-ups while taking credit for others' work and throwing teammates under the bus without hesitation. Someone who can shed crocodile tears in one meeting and ruthlessly fire an entire department in the next. If this sounds familiar, you might have encountered what researchers call a corporate psychopath. And here's the unsettling part: studies suggest they're more common in executive suites than you might think. Here's what makes corporate psychopaths so successful and so dangerous. The very traits that make them problematic are often the same ones that can help them excel in business. Think about it: being able to make tough decisions without emotional interference, maintaining calm under pressure, and having an unwavering focus on goals. These can all be valuable leadership traits when properly channeled. But here's the dark side: these individuals aren't just unemotional decision makers. They're often master manipulators who build their success on others' downfall. They're particularly drawn to high-stakes environments like finance, upper management, and politics. Why? Because those fields often reward the ability to take risks without emotional hesitation and prioritize results over relationships. What's particularly troubling is how well they play the corporate game. They're experts at managing up, showing their superiors exactly what they want to see, while often creating chaos and destroying morale among their subordinates. And by the time the true damage becomes apparent, they've usually moved on to their next opportunity, leaving a wake of broken teams and damaged organizations behind them. Early warning signs in the workplace can be subtle but consistent. Watch for patterns like taking credit for others' work while deflecting blame, creating conflict between team members while appearing helpful to leadership, sudden character assassinations of colleagues who might threaten their position or who might have recently departed, and an uncanny ability to identify and exploit others' weaknesses. Pay particular attention if someone's workplace stories constantly position them as the hero, while others are always portrayed as incompetent or malicious. Now think back to that friend or romantic partner who seemed too good to be true at first. Incredibly charming, exciting, always saying exactly what you wanted to hear. But slowly, the mask started slipping, revealing someone who could manipulate your emotions like a maestro conducting an orchestra, while showing no real empathy or remorse for their actions. Today, we'll explore why some people can maintain such an incredibly convincing facade of normal emotions while feeling none of them. The really fascinating and heartbreaking thing about psychopaths and sociopaths and how they handle relationships is their ability to create an almost perfect illusion of connection. It's like they've studied a manual on human emotions and can perform them flawlessly, but there's no real feeling behind the performance. In the beginning, they often seem like the perfect partner or friend. They're incredibly good at identifying what you want and becoming exactly that person. They'll mirror your interests, share your values, and seem to understand you better than anyone else ever has. It's an intoxicating experience until you start noticing the cracks in the facade. The mask usually starts slipping when they've gained your trust and emotional investment. You might notice that their tragic backstories don't quite add up, or that their emotional reactions seem carefully calculated rather than genuine. They might go from being intensely attentive to completely cold when they have nothing to gain from you anymore. But here's what makes it really complex. These aren't always conscious manipulations. Many psychopaths and sociopaths truly believe their own performances in the moment. It's not necessarily that they're thinking, I'm going to manipulate this person. Rather, it's more like they're constantly performing in a play where they're always the hero of their own story, and everyone else is just a supporting character. That's one reason seemingly benign trends online, such as calling other people NPCs, can be so dangerous. When we hear about massive corporate frauds that wiped out thousands of people's life savings, or see political leaders who can convince entire populations to follow them down destructive paths, we often wonder, how did they get away with this for so long? And the answer might be in understanding how psychopathic traits can actually help certain individuals rise to positions of power, and why our flawed, monetarily focused, individualistic social systems sometimes reward the very traits we should be guarding against. The truly mind-bending thing about psychopaths and sociopaths in positions of power is how our social systems can actually help them succeed. Think about it. We often praise and reward traits like making tough decisions, staying cool under pressure, or not letting emotions cloud the judgment. Sound familiar? And what's particularly unsettling is how these individuals can influence entire organizations or even societies. They have an uncanny ability to tap into people's desires and their fears, offering simple solutions to complex problems. They're masters at creating us versus them narratives, positioning themselves as the only one who can solve the crisis, often a crisis they helped create. The ripple effects can be staggering. When someone without empathy reaches a position of real power, whether in government or business, they're making decisions that affect thousands or even millions of lives without any emotional compass to guide them. They might tank an entire company for short-term gain, or implement policies that harm vulnerable populations simply because it serves their interests. These traits can manifest differently across cultures, too. In highly individualistic societies, you might see more overt self-promotion and direct manipulation. In more collective cultures, the behaviors might be more subtle, like mastering social protocols to gain power while quietly undermining community bonds. What's universal, though, is how these individuals identify and exploit whatever their particular culture values most highly. They're chameleons, adapting their strategies to their environment while maintaining their core traits. As artificial intelligence reshapes our world, here's a chilling question to consider. What happens when individuals who lack empathy and moral constraints are the people programming our AI systems or making crucial decisions about privacy and security? In an era where technology can amplify both the best and worst of human nature, and so many tech billionaires have new and unfettered access to government power globally, understanding how to protect against psychopathic influence in tech leadership has never been more critical. What keeps a lot of tech ethicists up at night isn't just the advancement of AI, it's who's guiding that advancement. When you have individuals who lack empathy making critical decisions over our privacy, security, or human rights, the potential for harm scales exponentially with the power of the technology. Think about it. AI systems learn from the data and parameters we give them. If the people in charge of these systems view human emotions as weaknesses to be exploited rather than essential aspects of humanity to be protected, what kind of AI are they creating? And this isn't just theoretical. We're already seeing examples of technology being used to manipulate emotions, exploit vulnerabilities, and prioritize profit over people's well-being. The good news is that there's a growing awareness of these risks. More organizations are implementing ethical oversight and requiring diverse perspectives and decision-making processes. But it's a constant battle between innovation and protection, between progress and safety. Remember Bernie Madoff? The investment wizard who charmed billions from his clients while running the largest Ponzi scheme in history? Or Elizabeth Holmes, who built Theranos on a foundation of charisma and deception? These aren't just stories of financial fraud. While we can't assume someone's diagnosis from afar, these are masterclasses in how psychopathic traits can manifest in the real world. Let's look behind the headlines to understand the patterns that can help us spot the next wolf in sheep's clothing. Pull back the curtain with me on some of these high-profile cases, because they're master classes in how these personality types operate. The fascinating thing about cases like Madoff's isn't just the scale of the fraud. It's how he managed to maintain such unwavering trust while systematically destroying people's lives. The pattern is almost always the same: exceptional charm, an ability to make powerful people trust them implicitly, and a complete lack of remorse, even when confronted with the devastation they've caused. These aren't just criminals, they're people who've managed to build entire empires on a foundation of manipulation and deception. What's particularly chilling is how they often view their victims. It's not that they actively hate the people they harm, it's that they simply don't view them as real people with lives and feelings. To them, others are just pieces on a chessboard, background players, a means to an end. Can psychopaths be cured? This is one of the most common questions I get from listeners. Imagine trying to teach empathy to someone who fundamentally lacks the capacity to feel it. That's just one of the challenges facing mental health professionals who work with psychopathic individuals. While traditional therapy often falls short, groundbreaking research is challenging our assumptions about treatment. Today we'll explore what actually works and what doesn't in addressing psychopathic traits. While there's no cure for psychopathy or sociopathy, certain therapeutic approaches can mitigate some behaviors. Here's where things get really interesting and challenging. Traditional therapy often relies on building emotional connections and helping people understand the impact of their actions on others. How do you do that with someone who fundamentally can't feel empathy or emotional connection? It's like trying to explain color to someone who's been blind from birth. The traditional tools just don't work, but that doesn't mean there's no hope. Modern approaches focus less on creating emotional awareness and more on practical strategies for managing behavior. Think of it like teaching someone to drive safely, even if they don't understand why hitting pedestrians is wrong. The breakthrough has come from understanding that while we might not be able to make someone feel empathy, we can help them recognize patterns, understand consequences, and develop better decision-making processes. Some newer treatments even use brain training techniques to help people better regulate their impulses and their responses. While overall success rates can be modest, there are encouraging examples. In one program focusing on younger individuals, participants showed significant improvement in impulse control and decision-making when therapy centered on personal benefit rather than emotional appeals. Another success story involved a corporate environment where leadership coaching combined with strict accountability measures helped an executive channel their traits into more constructive patterns. The key in both cases? Focusing on practical outcomes that affected them personally, rather on emotional change that would help other people. Whether it's a family member, a colleague, or a boss, many of us will encounter psychopathic individuals in our lives. The good news, there are proven strategies for protecting your mental health and maintaining boundaries when you can't simply walk away. In this segment, we'll give you practical tools for surviving and thriving when dealing with psychopathic personalities. So what do you do when you can't avoid interacting with someone who has these traits? First, accept that you can't fix them or appeal to emotions that they don't have. Instead, focus on what you can control, your boundaries, your responses, and your protection strategies. Think of it like dealing with a powerful natural force, like the ocean. You can't change how the ocean behaves, but you can learn to swim, you can watch for warning signs, and you can avoid dangerous situations. Some practical strategies for this include documenting everything in professional settings. This includes sending yourself a meeting summary at the end of each meeting and CCing the other person so the documentation is two-way and you're both protected. Maintaining emotional distance while keeping interactions professional. Building a strong support network. Understanding that their behavior isn't about you, it's about how they're wired. And above all else, learning to trust your instincts when something feels off. The key is understanding that while these individuals might occupy important roles in our lives as colleagues, supervisors, family members, or friends, we don't have to become victims of their behavior patterns. Today's look into the minds of psychopaths and sociopaths uncovers a complex picture. While the challenges these personality disorders pose are significant, understanding their dynamics and impacts can equip us to handle interactions more effectively and to safeguard our communities and ourselves. It's vital for mental health professionals, policymakers, and the public to continue exploring and investing in both therapeutic approaches and protective strategies. As we come to the close of this episode, remember that awareness and education are key in dealing with psychopathy and sociopathy, especially in high-stakes environments. Whether it's personal safety or organizational integrity, understanding these personalities can make a critical difference. You may have noticed that we changed our usual episode to be more conversational. Don't worry, you can find the list of researchers, journal articles, and books that informed this episode in the show notes. We'd love to hear which format you liked better as well. Let us know in a comment on our Patreon or via an email if you'd like us to go back to the more academic narrative style we've been using, where we cite our research right in line with the podcast, or if you prefer this method with the research listed in the show notes afterwards. Reflect on today's discussion and join us on social media to share how this information might change the way you view leadership and personal relationships. And don't forget to subscribe to the podcast for more insights into the psychology that shapes our world. Thank you for tuning in to PsyberSpace. I'm your host, Leslie Poston, signing off. Until next time, keep questioning, keep learning, and as always, stay curious.